Communion in the hand versus communion in the mouth. What did the Virgin Mary reveal at Akita? The bishop immediately interpreted the secret revelation made by the Virgin Mary. In 1973, Our Lady appeared to a nun in Akita, Japan. The apparition was approved, and Cardinal Ratzinger, then prefect of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, would say that it is the continuation of Fatima. Several extraordinary supernatural events took place there, but today she is basically remembered for her last message, that of October 13th, date of the miracle of the Son of Fatima. There, she warned that the work of the devil would infiltrate the church, generating conflicts and persecutions of faithful priests, and that unless men repented, the Heavenly Father would send fire from heaven. And one of the transcendent messages she received there was about how heaven prefers the Eucharist to be taken, with the hand or in the mouth, which has gone unnoticed. Here, we will talk about how heaven's message in Akita was about taking the Eucharist in the hand or in the mouth, and how heaven prefers communion to be taken. On May 12, 1973, Agnes Sasagawa, 42, entered the novitiate of the Institute of the Handmaids of the Holy Eucharist, who led a quiet and hidden prayer life in a convent outside Akita. Agnes was a convert from Buddhism and was totally and hopelessly deaf. And a month later, on June 12, 1973, the first miraculous event happened in Akita when Agnes was praying. A bright light came out of the tabernacle several times, and sometimes accompanied by something like smoke, which illuminated the statue of Our Lady. Agnes approached the statue and suddenly felt the wooden statue come to life, bathed in bright light and trying to speak to her. As she saw a multitude of angel-like beings surrounding the altar in adoration before the host, as she would see other times in adoration. On the evening of June 28, 1973, Agnes discovered on the palm of her left hand a wound in the shape of a cross, which she found extremely painful. And on July 5, 1973, a small opening appeared in the center from which blood began to flow. Thereafter, the pain would subside for most of the week, except on Thursday nights and all day Friday when the pain became almost unbearable. And as the guardian angel later predicted, the wound disappeared on Friday, July 27th, without a trace. This painful wound made it impossible for Sister Agnes to receive Holy Communion in her hand, as was the custom at the time. And one day later, on July 6, 1973, the first Friday of the month at 3 o'clock in the morning, her guardian angel appeared to her, asked her to follow him, and told her not to pray only for her sins, but in reparation for the sins of humanity. The angel told her that the present world wounds the most Sacred Heart of Jesus with its ingratitude and its outrages, and that the wound in the hand of the Blessed Virgin is much deeper than hers. On arriving at the chapel, the angel disappeared, and Agnes knelt before the altar in front of the tabernacle in profound adoration. Then she approached the statue of the Virgin Mary and saw that the image had a cross-shaped wound on her right hand, and she heard a sweet voice coming from the statue, which among other things told her that she would be cured of her deafness, and to pray a lot for the Pope, the bishops, and the priests. The next morning, when the sisters gathered to recite lauds, they found blood on the statue's right hand. The wound matched the wound on Agnes's left hand, except that because the statue's hand was smaller, her wound was smaller. One of the sisters said it had the appearance of a real human flesh, and you could even see the grain of the skin like a fingerprint. The statue would bleed on Fridays in July 1973, just like the wound on Sister Agnes's hand. On August 3rd, Agnes would receive a second message from Our Lady. She told her that many men in this world afflict the Lord, and that she wants souls to console him in order to soften the wrath of the Heavenly Father, asking souls to make reparation with their suffering and their poverty for sinners and ungrateful people. And as a preview of the October 13th message, she will tell her that the Heavenly Father is preparing to inflict a great chastisement on all mankind. But she added that with her son, she has intervened several times to appease the wrath of the Father, preventing the coming of calamities, offering him the sufferings of the Son on the cross, his precious blood, and the suffering of the beloved victim souls, the prayer, penance, and sacrifices of the faithful. Then the statue would first sweat, and then it would weep 101 times in the sight of millions because it was televised. Bishop Ito would later have the sweat, tears, and blood analyzed, and it was discovered that the blood belonged to blood group AB, and the sweat and tears to blood group O, while Agnes's blood was group B. But what interests us in this case is to analyze the message behind the bleeding of Agnes's left hand and the right hand of the statue. The left hand is the one with which communion is received, while the right hand is the one with which communion is given. During those apparitions, Agnes received the stigmata in her left hand, while the statue of Our Lady had a cross-shaped stigmata in her right hand. Then Bishop Ito took the double sign of the blood on the hand of the nun and Our Lady as Our Lady's refusal of communion in her hand, to the point that from that moment on the whole convent began to take communion in the mouth. On the other hand, in the first apparition, Agnes prayed with Our Lady and her angel the community prayer of the congregation, and upon reaching the words, Jesus present in the Eucharist, Mary instructed, "From now on you will add, truly present." In 1970, there had been a vote of the bishops in Japan that enabled communion in the hand, and the discussion revolved around the message to be given to the faithful about the real presence of Jesus Christ in the consecrated host. But 3 years later, Our Lady would tell them that this was wrong. Today, analysts often ignore this aspect of Akita, which condemns communion in the hand. Although Sister Sasagawa and Bishop Ito repeatedly said that this was an important aspect of Our Lady's message, communion in the hand had come about in 1969 as a special permission from Paul VI for European countries where there were many Protestants who were used to taking communion in the hand, because, for example, they came from Calvinism. And then the request and permission became generalized in all countries, although the default position of the Church is still, to this day, communion in the mouth. However, many priests and bishops act as if it were the other way around, and some even forbid communion in the mouth and kneeling, which is becoming more accentuated lately. Well, so much for what we wanted to talk about the message that the Akita apparition has given us, that heaven prefers communion in the mouth, and how this has been put on the back burner when talking about the Akita apparitions. And I would like to ask you if the priests you know prefer the faithful to take communion in the hand, in the mouth, or is it all the same to them? Thank you for your support. May God bless you and keep you, and may the Immaculate Heart of Mary be your refuge.